Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. The Japanese Grand Prix is here. Multiple upgrades for various teams up and down the grid, especially the Red Bull RB20. A surprising visual change to their car that is certainly worth a look. Other teams will need to try and keep pace, especially around a circuit like this. Mercedes, having struggled in the first few races, they have a brand new upgrade, a Go Faster stripe on their side pod. Very much interested your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. First of all, the Japanese fans, as always, are out in good force. He actually got Yuki Tsunoda to sign this Visa Cash App credit card that he got. I thought this is fantastic. There's so many great pictures every single year, but lots of drama today actually to dive into. Firstly, on the Alonso-Russell incident back in Australia. Russell's been commenting on this. Obviously, he's not going to say that a penalty was undeserved. He actually mentioned they'd bumped into each other in a coffee shop in Monaco, and Max said, did you brake test him to kind of get your own back in some sense? Russell was also saying, though, there could be some way to automate at least a virtual safety car to prevent the risky situation that occurred at the Grand Prix. There's two solutions to this, really. One, don't put it in the wall, but like that is a relatively fast, somewhat dangerous corner. The corner itself isn't dangerous. The thing that's, to me at least, the dangerous thing about it is the way that it's designed in terms of if you crash at that corner, your car comes back on the track, basically whatever you do. And that is the dangerous part. That's when drivers get killed, is when they get T-boned at high speed. Lance Stroll, if he wasn't very quickly warned by his race engineer, there could have been a big incident there, right? So Russell's theory is maybe in those cases when there's a car on the track, there's some sort of like automatically deployed VSC at a minimum, just to kind of ensure that the drivers slow down without needing some manual intervention. Because sure, you put out the double yellows, but you know, do drivers really slow down for double yellows that much? Probably not. They would be forced to for a virtual safety car. So that's what Russell says, and I can understand his point of view. He also says, though, that he was looking at his steering wheel while Fernando slowed down. All of a sudden he looks up again, and bang, then he's in the wall because of the dirty air and all this type of stuff. And maybe you say, well, that's just good, smart racing from Alonso. He knows what Russell's going to be doing behind him because he's been so consistent there over the last few laps. Alonso puts in a surprise maneuver. And well, the rest, of course, is history. Alonso said he's not going to change his approach. He said, yeah, I'm not going to change my driving style because of this. And he also does admit, and even Sainz apparently said this in the drivers' meeting in Australia, that some changes to turn 6 might be necessary or certainly looked into. Maybe not change the corner, but changing the runoff area and the way the barriers work there, just so that if such an incident was to occur again, then, you know, a car wouldn't be catapulted back onto the track. Because whatever you want to say about this incident, if Russell had not put it in the wall and he'd survived and he'd, you know, maybe got into gravel but kept it on the track, there's almost certainly no penalty for Alonso in that case. It would be, you know, drawn out to a Russell mistake. But because Russell crashed and was in the wall, then all of a sudden it's like, well, did Alonso, you know, do something wrong here? That's the thing. The stewards can say all they want, that they don't base these decisions on the outcome. But they do, and I don't think you're ever really going to prevent that, because if Russell wasn't in the wall, I highly doubt anything was done to Alonso, and this would almost certainly not be talked about. However, Russell went on to say that if they didn't penalise that, he actually said, Russell, that what Alonso did wasn't dramatically dangerous, but it's like if you don't penalise what he did, slowing down, speeding up again, slowing down again in that straight to throw off Russell, as it were, then are you allowed to brake in the middle of a straight? Like, where does the rule go in terms of what is acceptable driving standards? Some, especially old school drivers, would say, let us do what we want. We're the racing drivers. We can, within reason, decide how we want to drive. And I kind of more lean towards that side than I do to the other side, but I see Russell's point of view as well. And the drivers were pretty much split right down the middle on this. Hulkenberg gave his thoughts. Russell's thoughts, of course, are obvious. Lance Stroll said it was ridiculous to give a penalty for that. Sure, he's Alonso's teammate, but he says that they shouldn't interfere with the driver's authority. Leclerc, though, says, yeah, the drivers have their tricks, and on this case, Fernando went a step too far. It was right that he was punished. But then you talk to the McLaren guys, they think differently. Norris said that Russia should have been prepared for such tactics, because when you're chasing Alonso, to be fair, you probably got to be ready for him to try and pull some sort of a stunt. And Norris said, yes, I don't think there should be a punishment for that. What Fernando did was strange, but I don't think you can call it a brake test. Alonso simply tried to be clever, but it wasn't aggressive. And Piastri says, yeah, I was a bit surprised by the penalty. Imposing a penalty for this potentially sets a very, very sensitive precedent for everybody, because there was a penalty even though there was no contact between the cars. And that's another fair point, right? That not only Russell's point is, well, if you don't penalise him, then you're opening a can of worms in terms of what else could potentially get away without being penalised. But as Piastri said, all of a sudden you're also opening this can of worms, where by penalising him, what other incidents might be, given penalties, even though there was no contact between the two respective cars. The other big drama of the day, though, was around Williams again. Just a couple of weeks ago, when Albon crashed his car, and they decided, very controversially indeed, to kick Sargeant out of the car and put Albon in. Now, they didn't score points with Albon that weekend. Now, I'm sure they wish that they had have done, because they would have silenced, to some degree, some of the criticism. My feeling was that Albon had probably earned, with his performances over Sargeant over the last couple of years, that second opportunity, but it still doesn't look good for Logan. There's also a debate on how Logan will respond. Will he feel massively disrespected by the team, as he could well do, and I wouldn't blame him for thinking that way, or will he kind of have the dog in him, or even, and would be appropriate there as well, to come back stronger and really try and prove the team wrong and have a good result, because James Vowles could have said, you know what, Logan, Albon's crashed his car, we're going to let you represent us this weekend, do a great job. And if they'd done that, maybe Logan, really fired up, motivated by the fact that a team seems to have his back, commits to it and does a great job. But obviously that's not the case, and I think it's quite clear what Williams think of Logan Sargeant, especially when they have now done the following. So Albon's chassis, which crashed, needed to be repaired from top to bottom. Williams have done that successfully, and apparently the repair job has been even better than they thought, as in, it's not so much heavier. When you repair a chassis, it's going to get heavier naturally, but apparently it's not much different to what it was previously, so there is some optimism here. But Albon's car that he will drive this upcoming weekend, Alex Albon, will be Sargeant's car from last time out. They're going to keep the car that was in perfect nick for Albon, and the car that crashed and needs to be repaired, that was Albon's, is now going to be Logan Sargeant. So this is the thing that you think, well, Albon crashed that car, maybe it's fair that you give it back to him. But no, Sargeant says the workload to switch the cars back over would be far too much for the mechanics. So maybe there's something in that. I don't know if I fully buy it personally, but I guess the idea is that having crashed his own car, Albon then steps into Sargeant's car. They, rejig the whole car, because Albon's, different heights, different, whatever, different dimensions, let's say. They have to change those things. The setup and other things, I imagine they have to change as well. So, fair enough. They had to adapt Sargeant's car to Albon, and they think, well, to adapt it back, or just give Sargeant the older version that was crashed previously and has now been fixed, maybe fair enough, but it still just doesn't really send a message that people want to be getting across, right? So, I believe that the chassis repair went better than expected, though only 100 grams heavier. But still, it's heavier, and it has made people wonder whether, are they concerned that it's not perfectly fine, right? Because clearly they think that Sargeant's chassis that Albon is driving now, going forwards, is okay, and maybe Sargeant's one is a bit compromised that he's now going to have to drive. Very interesting. But as Will Buxton says, apparently Williams aren't the only team with this problem. There's been lots of talk as well about, well, Williams, what a shambolic team. They can't even have a spare chassis there, which is true, to be fair. Why not let Andretti into the sport, which I also don't disagree with. But you've got to understand that Williams are going through this massively transitional period right now. They've had a shambolic team behind the scenes. They're making their car on Excel. That's been talked about a lot in the media over the last couple of weeks. Over this winter, James Vowles, Pat Fry committed to a painful off-season and even a painful season to try and ensure that come 2026 and beyond, they're in a better position. So these are sacrifices that they are willing to make, even though that means that they have two cars this weekend in Japan, and if one of them or both of them crash, then they don't have a spare, and they won't have a spare for China either. I believe their only spare chassis will arrive in Miami, which is in quite a few races' time still at this point. So this is the debate as to whether all the goodwill that Williams have built up with the fan base over the last couple of years is now being evaporated, because, giving Sargeant the repaired chassis for Japan is pretty, it's difficult to justify on some sense, but maybe from another angle it actually makes a fair bit of sense. And if there is realistically no difference, then it shouldn't be that problematic. And clearly Williams believe that Albon is their man most likely to deliver points. So if one car is very slightly lighter than the other, they're going to give their better driver that car. There's a very clear number one, number two dynamic over there, and Sargeant really needs to have some good races if he wants to do anything to change that dynamic going forwards, and honestly, to save his seat in Formula 1, because let's be real, at this pace and on this evidence, Williams aren't keeping him around next season. Speaking of that driver market, Lewis Hamilton was actually commenting on who he would like to replace him in an ideal world. We saw yesterday that Mercedes, they want Max Verstappen, obviously, and they seemingly are willing to do everything it takes to get him. Whether that's going to happen still feels rather unlikely, but Hamilton has said, the only thing that I care about is that the team takes on someone with integrity and values that are aligned with the team and where the team is going, someone with compassion to work with all these great people and continue to lift them up. And that's when, of course, the conversation around Seb has come around, and Vettel has actually been very clear in the media over the last few days that he has at least considered a motorsport return. And Hamilton says, yeah, I'd love for Seb to come back, multi-world championship winning driver, someone who's got amazing values, could continue to push the team forward, would love it if he came back, but still feels like a long shot to me. There's also been talk on Carlos Sainz. I must say I'm somewhat surprised by the depth at which this talk is coming up, because it's not like we're in first practice in Abu Dhabi, right? Like, we are only in the 4th race of the season, and regardless of the quality of a driver, I don't think it should be massively surprising that a driver has not yet signed 4 races in. Sure, if we're in, Qatar or pushing on to Abu Dhabi, Brazil or whatever, like Austin, that time of the season, then sure, there's more of a question about it. But, for now, I'm not massively surprised that Sainz hasn't put pen to paper yet. But of course, Mercedes, Aston, Red Bull, all conversations to be had. And according to Carlos Sainz, conversations are being had. He wants to speed up talks, but he says, yes, we are talking to pretty much everybody in terms of getting this job done. We've got to talk about some upgrades as well for this weekend, because Sainz won the Grand Prix last time out in Australia. There's a good argument that even if Max Verstappen didn't have the DNF, then he may still have lost to Carlos Sainz. Such was the strong pace of that Ferrari. But around Suzuka, that car, and especially that car in Max Verstappen's hands, has been ridiculous around this track over the last couple of years. Even last year when the McLaren was strong, the Red Bull in Max's hands was still 3.5-ish tenths faster and like 8-9 tenths faster than anybody else, such as Ferrari and or certainly Mercedes. Haas are bringing their upgrade as well in Shanghai. The plan was for Imola, but can you believe it? Haas have actually manufactured an upgrade earlier than expected, and maybe it's even going to work. So they're bringing that to Shanghai next race, of course, whereas it was originally planned for Imola in a couple of races' time. These, though, are the big changes. Alpine have a new front wing, so yeah, I don't know what to say about that. To be fair, they weren't terrible last time out. They potentially have some room for improvements. There is talk that their upgrades will be lighter because their car is overweight, which is not ideal, especially when their car is slow in a straight line because their engine is bad, and there's so many other problems as well. This, though, I've got to say on the Aston Martin, so I'll just quickly show you guys this angle of it. You guys might actually notice or recognize this side pod design from what they first did on the AMR 22B way back in 2022, when they brought this side pod design that was very reminiscent of the RB18 at the time, and there was lots of talk as to exactly how Dan Fallows and the team had come up with that idea. Red Bull now don't have that idea anymore. However, they do have this new cooling inlet at the top of the side pod that seemingly feeds in to the, let's say the shoulders of the car that are somewhat Mercedes W14 inspired. Also seems like there are further changes in front of that are going to affect the airflow into this point. It's also quite probable, I would say, that they have brought in Red Bull some sort of a floor upgrade or something to that effect. There were rumours that there was going to be a Red Bull floor upgrade this weekend. Of course, we can't see that unless, Sergio Perez or maybe Max Verstappen puts it in the wall. But it is always interesting when teams bring back old ideas in some way, because this was the AMR 22B, I'm pretty sure, what they brought a few races into the season, when it had this interesting side pod design that was very reminiscent of the Red Bull at the time, and people were confused as to exactly how they come up with that idea. Now, though, they've effectively brought it back here for the AMR 24 a couple of years down the line. Aston have also changed a little bit to their floor, so as we can see here, a couple of changes for their Suzuka spec and basically the rear element of the floor, changing a few things around. So it seems like of all the teams that have brought changes this weekend, the most significant are Red Bull and Aston Martin. The Red Bull change, though, visually is rather significant. You've got to wonder whether this is going to be a permanent addition to their car, whether it's something circuit specific, but yeah, seems to be a pretty permanent addition. And we know that Red Bull, of all the cars, they have some really interesting stuff going on at their side pods. When we saw, well, they kept it shrouded in mystery, right? When they revealed their car and they weren't willing to show because they shadowed it what was going on with their side pod inlets. Turns out there's like 2 side pod inlets. There's one narrower one higher up, and then there's one slim one that runs vertically to the car. And now they've got another like cooling scoop here on the top element of their car. So yeah, just to show you some images of what that looked like before and after. And they've actually got rid of, it seems, these cooling elements here. So So these engine cover side outlets are now gone in replacement for this new entry point further along. So exactly what that is doing is a question mark. Obviously, I'm sure those guys know. Also worth noting, though, in this image and this side to side, we can see in terms of the way the wing mirror is mounted, there's another element here, right? There's this element, and then there's this new element as well on this, well, the way the wing mirror is connected. It's always funny with the wing mirrors, right? Because what the regulations say is that, oh, well, the wing mirrors, you're not allowed to use them for aerodynamic advantage. They've got to just be there for their, like, actual purpose to see whatever is behind the driver. But, like, everything you design can either be designed aerodynamically or non-aerodynamically. So the teams will always say, well, we've got this extra mounting points here, which is definitely useful to make sure that the wing mirror stays in place and is definitely nothing to do with the aerodynamic performance of the car. So just a couple of small tweaks, but something worthy to look at regardless. And then this kind of final shot here of what it looked like before. And yeah, they still have the headrest inlets and stuff like this, but it's visually rather different to how it was previously. Whether that in and of itself is a dramatic performance advantage, who knows? But if it helps with the cooling in a very effective way, and that's been actually a big talking point, to be fair, of the new Red Bull, is how they are cooling their car so effectively with very slim side pods. James Allison of Mercedes even said a while ago now when they saw the car for the first time that, wow, even Mercedes, and maybe even Mercedes isn't the right way to say it now because I don't know that anybody trusts them to know what's going on in this era of cars, but he was basically saying we don't understand how they are quite able to achieve this level of cooling with the packaging they have. So maybe this is one other element they will look to bring in. So Ferrari, they seem to have brought one or two things, nothing that's crazy from a visual perspective it seems, and there is definitely optimism from Ferrari that they can be, you know, more competitive this year, let's say, than they were at this circuit last year, because the Red Bull has dominated here for the last couple of years. We'll see, I would say, how many tenths Max puts it on pole by, because last year it was nearly 6 tenths. So if it's better than that, then Ferrari might well take it. And his feeling is that, yeah, Red Bull and Max are still going to be the strongest car. But actually, Carlos Sainz says that they believe Ferrari, they're only 2 tenths behind Red Bull, which actually is pretty damn competitive, all things considered, given the fact that the Ferrari is deemed to be a relatively easy to upgrade base version of their car, and the fact that the Red Bull have developed their car for longer just because of their performance advantage last season. To only be 2 tenths down, if that's where Ferrari actually are, is probably a pretty good sign for those guys going forwards, with big upgrades coming soon. We have a small rear modification to the car in Suzuka, and sure, maybe Red Bull are great at this track, maybe Ferrari aren't so great given the nature of the circuit, maybe Red Bull's upgrade, especially to the floor, gives it another couple of tenths. We'll see how the weekend plays out, but if Ferrari can be anywhere within 3 tenths, I would say, in qualifying and race trim this weekend, that I think is a genuine sign that we could have some degree of competition this season. But I think it's still too early to say really on that one, given how the first couple of races concluded. I will mention quickly on Mercedes, because there were rumours the other day they were bringing some changes here. We haven't really seen much visually. The only thing that we have seen visually on this car, if you guys actually, well, maybe I'll just zoom in so you guys can see, is this on the side pod. I'm pretty sure this wasn't here before, right? Did they have this line on the side pod previously? This one here, this kind of Petronas blue line that runs in the middle of the side pod? I don't know if they did. So it seems like what they've done to turn their season around, Toto Wolff, who wasn't going to attend this race, he's come along and he said, all right, guys, we're going to paint another blue line on the car. We're going to get the Go Faster stripes on. That is the last and final thing we can possibly try with this machine right now. And more than likely, it ain't going to do that much for them. Just before we close out on the topic of chassis, as we had earlier with the Logan Sargeant, Alex Albon discussion, Daniel Ricciardo has actually been quite clear that he thinks there might be something wrong with his car. Now, do you guys think this is just him inventing, or do you think there's anything to this? Because Ricciardo in Australia was making the point that even though he did a good lap that was outside of track limits, he could not believe the lap time that Yuki Tsunoda did. He thinks that he couldn't have been able to do that. And his theory is that it's not a skill issue. He thinks that his car is somehow broken in some way. He's asked the team to look at the car. They say, seems fine to us. But Ricciardo is telling his team, look, let's look into all the possibilities here. Like, before you tell me I'm bad, like, let's actually look into this car, get it sorted, change the chassis, and then see if that's a problem. So Yeah, I don't know. To me, it sounds like Ricciardo is just coming up with excuses and getting into his own head. But maybe there's something to it, and if they make a new chassis for Danny Rick and all of a sudden he's flying again, then I guess there was something to it. But I'm certainly going to wait to see evidence of that before I actually believe that might be the case. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Thanks to all the new subscribers over the last couple of days. Not really that far away as well from 50k, which is absolutely mega. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.